Tommy, that's kind of the question, isn't it? I mean, I guess the point's been made. The majority of people that will vote for Mamdani and put him in office won't be the ones getting taxed and paying for these things. So it's kind of easy for them to vote for him because it doesn't affect their lives in their eyes. But it does affect their employer, which affects their landlord, and affects everyone else that sets the prices for them.
Right, it certainly does. And I think it's frustrating when we hear that affordability is what people are turning out for. I'm not saying affordability isn't an important issue. It certainly is, and both parties need to address it. But what I think a lot of these individuals that are coming to hear AOC, Bernie, Mamdani, is it about affordability or is it the promise of free things that he can't actually deliver? And this is actually going back to what has been a month-long discussion of Charlie Kirk and the legacy he's left. But Charlie Kirk understood that socialism was appealing to young people. He understood it a long time ago. He understood it a decade ago. It never went anywhere. It's still here. So there are a lot of young people and a lot of New Yorkers that feel like things are unaffordable because they are. And when they hear somebody else will just pay for it, don't worry, we can fix all of your problems by taxing the rich. They have more than they need. That is appealing. I've watched both debates. The only solution that Mamdani has given these young people is tax the rich. And when he's questioned, and I give the moderator some credit about that, about, well, you don't really have the power to do it. Kathy Hochul says she's not going to do it. He hasn't given a good substitute for how he plans to pay for all these free things. So I would remind the young people, I understand that affordability is a problem. It certainly is. Both parties need to address it better. But just promising all these things you can't deliver, that's not a solution that's going to work for anybody.
Lisa?
Well, look, I think that we need to show more discernment about who we give citizenship to. The bulk of the conversation in the country has centered around illegal immigration, but I think we need to talk about legal immigration as well. You have someone like Zohran Mamdani, who's been an American citizen for just a few short years, who, in my opinion, holds anti-American beliefs. You look at his dad as well. Reports recently of claiming that the Nazis took direct cues from the United States, blaming the United States for a history of genocide, ethnic cleansing, official racism, and concentration camps. A video going around about Zohran Mamdani talking about how, crying because of his aunt saying that she had to take off her hijab after 9/11. Well, I think the 3,000 individuals who lost their lives at 9/11, those are the victims, right? So there's some frustration about what he said there. But I think it's because of some of these comments that Democrat leaders have been reluctant to embrace him fully. I mean, it says something that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries took so long to endorse him. When we're less than 2 weeks away from the election, he finally gives Zohran Mamdani the endorsement. Senator Chuck Schumer has not endorsed him, Nancy Pelosi either, right? So I think when people are talking about, is he the future of the party, I think the fact that the reluctance of the endorsements is probably no right now.
Yeah, Guy, he sits there and he acts like, everyone's Islamophobic, like his religion is why they don't like him. But the kind of the connection there, and I think what he is trying to gloss over is this idea that he's called Israel genocidal. He's failed to condemn Hamas. We showed a picture of him with someone who many people believe was a co-conspirator, if not a sympathizer of World Trade Center bombings and 9/11. And so it's this idea that it's not your religion, it's the things that you have cozied up to that were done in the name of your religion that people have an issue with.
And he supported Globalize the Intifada. Won't condemn that either, right? I mean, the list goes on. That imam that he was pictured with is absolutely a terrorist sympathizer who was pressed and would not say a bad thing about Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
Who planned 9/11, the arch terrorist, of course. So this Islamophobia bleeding really doesn't do it for me. I'm sort of astonished to see it having any success or cachet in this city, in New York City of all places, not that far removed from 9/11. I know it's been decades, but my goodness. I mean, you look at what he has said. If he's concerned about hate crimes based on religion, the overwhelming majority of hate crimes in that category in this city, the victims are Jews. It's not even close. And when he's asked about that, he'll say a few nice-sounding words and then also refuse to condemn Globalize the Intifada. Yeah. And he loathes the Jewish state and doesn't believe it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. So that speaks for itself. He was talking about how his aunt, supposedly after 9/11, stopped taking the subway because she was worried about being heckled or abused in some way wearing a hijab. If that's true, that shouldn't happen. No one should face that kind of discrimination if it's true. But she isn't really the victim of 9/11, right? There's a lot of New Yorkers who stopped taking the subway after 9/11 because they were dead. because they were murdered by Islamists. And there is a difference between Muslims and Islamists. And I think some of those blurred lines is what can really concern people. And when there are pro-Hamas hate rallies in our streets and on our campuses week after week after week, with horrific things said about Jews, for example, and really radical ideas about what should happen to this country, is it really phobic, i.e. an irrational fear, to have some concern about the Islamism? And I haven't really heard him address that in any meaningful way other than conflating it all and calling it Islamophobia. No,
I don't think you will. I mean, Tim Kaine was on with Shannon Bream today, and he would say, yeah, it's bad that Christians are being persecuted, but he had to go in there with, and everybody else is too, or even went so far as to say, well, not all Christians are being persecuted because they're Christians. It's a Democrat problem. It's not Democrat socialist. It's not just Mamdani. The party threw this tent. Remember, Obama wouldn't let us say radical Islamic terrorist. He wouldn't even let us, or the administration didn't want to acknowledge the religious motivation of the folks that killed us on 9/11. And the Democrat Party is slow to let that die, I guess. Or I guess it's being reborn with Mamdani. And while Mamdani rallies with AOC and Bernie Sanders, a lot of people think he owes this thanks to his social media savvy team for giving him the lead in polls. Check it out.
I'm freezing. Your rep as the next mayor of New York City. Let's plunge into the details. I have to come clean. I have something to hide. Many things, in fact, because we're doing a scavenger hunt. No. Actually, we are doing a scavenger hunt across New York City. We have just begun our walk through the entirety of Manhattan. We're at Inwood Hill Park at the tip top. We're outside because New Yorkers deserve a mayor that they can see, they can hear, they can even yell at.
Yeah, another candidate that's not quite as slick as Mamdani is Curtis Sliwa, but he's gaining traction online. Check it out.
I'll be coming to a neighborhood near you real soon. 25 days to go. Let the people decide, because I'm in it to win it all the way. You deserve to go out and enjoy the culture of this city without fear for your life. What a slap in the face to Dominican pride that the city can't even clean this up in advance of their annual parade in the Bronx.
But perhaps the least unique individual and also probably the most disingenuous will be Andrew Cuomo. And this is how his social media is shaping up.
You need any help? You know, I'm great in the kitchen.
All right, it's time to vote, Jackson Heights. We are getting out the vote. It's day 3 of early voting.
Yeah, it's so bad that influencers are trying to help him gain traction. Check it out.
So today, I'm officially starting Hot Girls for Cuomo. So if you are a hot girl for Andrew Cuomo, I want to hear from you.
All right. So that was Emily Austin. She comes on the network, and I know her. And she's a millennial that's moved to the right because of the Israel issue, and she's involved in politics. She is a social media influencer, so I'm going to lay off her, but I'm going to go back to Cuomo, Tommy. When he's in the video, it's pretty cringe.
I'll tell you what, I'm not sure for Cuomo, Hot Girls for Cuomo is the right slogan. I don't know that if I were him, would want to resurrect those allegations. It gives a perfect segue and brings it real top of mind for folks. I think it's catchy and interesting. You know, you got Hot Girls for Cuomo. Obviously, sex sells. Everybody loves a flashy slogan for him. I'm not so sure it lands. There is no doubt that Mamdani is good on social media. As somebody who can appreciate the hustle of social media, I think that that's where he should stay, on social media. The same thing with AOC. I think a lot of these Democrats in these deep blue areas, they confuse electability nationally with popularity on social media. It's not the same thing. Except for if you're in a deep blue city like New York City, or if you're, in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's case in her district, it's okay. You can be an influencer and have horrible ideas, and you can still win elections because you got just what you need there. But I think that people should be cautioned. Just because someone makes a great video doesn't mean they should be leading the financial capital of the world. My goodness.
Yeah, that's such a great topic. And it's something that when people used to come to me and say, man, you should run for office. And I'd say, listen, there's a difference between a good communicator and a good decision maker. And I need some more life experience before that's even on the table for me. And we're really seeing the biggest part of that right now. People accuse Donald Trump of that. In 2015, I was one of them. It just happens to be that we were overlooking the fact he had built billion-dollar businesses prior to The Apprentice. So he was both. It's rare that somebody is both, and I don't think Mamdani's going to be both.
Well, what's his experience? I know this is a boring line of attack, and no one seems to care, but the guy's 33. He was a state legislature briefly and was absent a lot of the time and had these pie-in-the-sky left-wing ideas that broadly went nowhere. Before that, I guess he was like an amateur rapper. He's a rich kid with two wealthy, prominent parents, and tried to get into Columbia, where his dad's a professor, and couldn't, despite checking the African-American box, I think disingenuously on his own behalf. So what he's ever done to prepare himself to run the city of New York is beyond me. But I don't think people care, because he's focused on affordability, which people do care about, to Tommy's point. But the thing is, socialism, the vision that he's offering, isn't affordable. Someone has to pay the bills. His solution to that is the rich and the billionaires, who he also demonizes and tries to basically drive away through his policies. It doesn't make sense, but if you smile all the time, which he does, and if you can speak well and fluidly, which he can, that is a very dangerous political combination on either side in terms of reaching disaffected people who are unhappy with the status quo.
Lisa, chances are, and I mean heavily, he's going to win. So what do you think the prediction is? Does he become more of a sane person, and he rode this wave of radicalism to the office, but now once you get there, it's like once you get the horse by the reins, now you've got to ride it. Does that calm him down, or does he just absolutely ruin the city?
No, I think it goes back to his original beliefs, which, not condemning globalize the intifada or wanting to defund the police and some of these other crazy ideas that he has. So I think he goes back to where he originally was before he had to, try to win election. But look, Zohran Mamdani, in my opinion, is the embodiment of influencer culture, where it's all about flash, it's all about the clicks and the likes, it lacks substance, or doesn't need to be substance. And I think this is the future of politicians in the country if we don't change our trajectory as a nation. But to Guy's point about him lacking any sort of real experience, the New York Post found between 2014, when he graduated college, and being elected to the New York State Assembly in 2020, he only held a job for 3 years. And then when he got to the assembly, in part because of running, he missed 50% of his votes. He tried to be a rapper. He said that he doesn't have to worry about money because he can live off of mommy and daddy. He's living in subsidized housing, right? But, this could be the future of the country if we kind of continue down this, culture that's sort of devoid of substance.
Well, thankfully I don't live here, but I also will be here every week for the future. So I guess I'll just have to learn to live with Mamdani.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.